On Mother's Day, my sons traveled with their mothers-in-law and left me alone with a microwave meal. I spent the worst Mother's Day of my life, but it was also the beginning of the biggest transformation I've ever experienced. Throughout my life, I dedicated myself to my children with all the love a mother can offer. I believed that, at the very least, they would be by my side on Mother's Day. But that Sunday I was surprised by a silence that hurt more than any words. Instead of hugs, I received cold messages and a microwave meal left in the kitchen. It was the loneliest moment of my existence, but unknowingly it was also the starting point of a profound change. A journey of rediscovering myself, of discoveries of pain and strength. And even without expecting it, I found support where I least imagined, and a new version of myself began to emerge. Today, I share this story not just as an outburst, but as a testament that it's never too late to blossom. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment on the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The smell of freshly baked orange cake filled the house. As I arranged the flowers on the living room table, I put on my best blue dress, the one Jacob complimented once when he was still a teenager. I set the silver cutlery, folded the napkins as I did for their birthdays, and carefully arranged 3 plates. I waited. The clock showed 10:30 in the morning, but I knew they usually ran late. After all, it was Sunday. I went to the mirror and adjusted my hair. I smiled at myself, trying to contain the anxiety. The doorbell hadn't rung yet, but maybe they were parking. I went back to the kitchen to check on the food. The roast was still warm, the rice perfect. I sat for a moment looking out the window. The sky was clear. It was one of those perfect days you wait for months. I convinced myself that they must be getting organized with the grandchildren, maybe buying flowers or finalizing some surprise. The phone remained silent, but that could just mean they were too busy with preparations. I wanted to believe. I really did. My stubborn heart beat with hope. Maybe they're preparing a surprise. My cell phone vibrated once. Then again. I opened the messages with a smile that faded line by line. Jacob wrote that he unfortunately couldn't come. He had been invited by his mother-in-law to an unavoidable lunch. Tyler said Victoria thought it would be better to visit her parents that year. Ryan, more succinctly, just wished a happy day with emojis and said he was traveling with his girlfriend. I read each one twice, as if some detail had escaped me. As if, by rereading, I could find a sweeter reason for their absence. But all I found was the coldness of short texts, of rehearsed justifications. None of them asked how I was. None of them mentioned how much this day meant to me. The set table now seemed like a play without an audience. I got up slowly, as if my body was heavier. I went to the kitchen, looking for any trace of presents. The microwave beeped. I opened the door. Inside, a plastic plate with frozen food already cold. There was a note taped to it. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." In hurried handwriting. No signature. In the microwave, a plastic plate with cold food and a note. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." I sat at the table and stared at the 3 empty plates. That scene seemed like a portrait of what my life had become. Full of space for others, but with no one occupying it. I ate slowly without taste, just to silence my stomach. The tears came silently, streaming down my cheeks as I looked at the empty chairs. The food grew cold, as did my chest. I closed my eyes and saw myself in old times, waking up early to prepare breakfast, sewing costumes for school plays, cleaning scraped knees. I remembered how I smiled watching them grow, how I annulled myself in so many choices, never thinking that one day they might not remember. Everything I did was for love. But does too much love suffocate? The house was silent, but inside me thoughts screamed. Did I err in the way I loved? Did I raise them to fly so high that they forgot where the nest was? The weight of loneliness enveloped me like a cold blanket. Night fell without me noticing, and the light from the bedside lamp reflected on dry tears on my skin. That night, something inside me began to die. Or perhaps to awaken. In the days that followed, I tried to fill the hours with small rituals. Washing dishes, tending to plants, tidying drawers that were already tidy. I did everything as I always did, with the same discipline of years. But something in me was misaligned, like a crooked painting no one notices except the one who hung it. My eyes kept searching the clock, as if one of them would still appear. The loneliness seemed denser after that Sunday. Even the sound of birds in the backyard seemed to mock my silence. At the supermarket, I forced a smile when greeting acquaintances. I talked about the weather, about promotions. But inside everything hurt. In the window's reflection, I saw a woman dressed in strength, but who inside was in pieces. And yet, she tried to keep up appearances. On Wednesday morning, the doorbell rang. It was Ruth, my neighbor with the flowery garden and attentive heart. She brought a cornmeal cake with coconut and a warm smile. "I came to keep you company. I missed you on the garden benches." I thanked her, trying to disguise my choked voice. But she looked into my eyes with a firm sweetness. "You don't have to pretend with me, dear," she said. We sat on the porch and Ruth cut a generous slice of cake, insisting I try it. The sweet taste took me back to childhood, and for a moment, something calmed within me. She then began to speak, as if knowing that silence also hurts. She told about her children who lived far away, who rarely called, much less showed up. She spoke without bitterness but with raw truths. "For a long time I thought the problem was with me," she said. "But then I realized that sometimes people just choose to forget." Her words entered me like whispers of a known pain. I nodded, wanting to cry but holding back. She held my hand. "You're not crazy, Charlotte. Some things we feel even before we see them." With each sentence she spoke, a crack opened in the wall I had built myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone truly saw me. Someone who understood the silent language of forgotten mothers. Our pain at that moment stopped being solitary. It became a mirror. It became a bond. "But we can still write a new chapter," she whispered. The next afternoon, I went to the mailbox and by chance, found a birthday invitation for Victoria's parents, Tyler's wife. It was addressed to the couple, but the envelope had been misdirected. The event was on the exact same Sunday. Suddenly everything made sense. I remembered Jacob mentioning something unavoidable, and Ryan being with his girlfriend. The pieces fit together like a cruel puzzle. I went to the computer and with trembling hands, logged into social media. There were the photos. Smiles, toasts, lavish tables. In houses that weren't mine. No mention of Mother's Day with me. Just tributes to the mothers-in-law. My daughters-in-law, each one posting about how family is everything. While their husbands, my sons, just liked and commented with hearts and emojis. My blood ran cold. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a choice. It was a deliberate decision. The truth hit me like a bucket of cold water. The estrangement wasn't carelessness, it was orchestration. For years, I believed that loving was enough to be loved back. But perhaps, I was just serving as a backdrop in the life they built away from me. They didn't forget. They chose to leave me. I waited until the end of the week to write to Tyler. I chose my words carefully. I didn't want to accuse, just to understand. I asked if there was anything I had done, if there was any reason for the distance. The answer came hours later, cold as a glass of water forgotten on the table. "Mom, you're overreacting. It was just a logistical choice. We'll set another day." Those words, in such a casual tone, cut through me like a cold wind. I stared at the screen, wishing there was another message, some phrase that would soften it. But that was all. I closed my phone with trembling hands and faced the emptiness of the room. Was I really overreacting? Was my heart creating storms where there were only clouds? But everything in me screamed no. That there was real pain behind the absence. That their silence wasn't harmless. However, his response had a deeper effect. It made me question my own perception. Was I always too sensitive? Did others always handle detachment better? While I remained trapped in expectations of affection that never existed, my certainties began to crumble. Maybe I really am overreacting. Or maybe I'm finally seeing. Memories came like an old film, black and white, silent. I saw my childhood. My parents rushing to my younger brother while I waited with a scraped knee. I saw the day I won a medal at school and no one came to the presentation. I saw Christmases where I cooked alone while everyone laughed in the living room, without noticing my fatigue. I was always there. But no one seemed to see me. Then came the years with my husband. He was kind but distant. He never asked me how I felt, only if everything was okay at home. When he fell ill, I cared for him with all my love, but even at the end, his words were for our children, not for me. I was the backdrop to their story. The woman who kept everything running, invisible to the eyes of those who benefited from my efforts. Realizing this was like falling into a bottomless pit. There was a pattern, a constancy, a repetition. It wasn't just this Mother's Day. It was my entire life. I was always placed in the background like a useful but disposable piece. And now for the first time I saw it clearly. Being invisible seems to be my curse. That night, I opened an old notebook I kept in my desk drawer. It had a navy blue cover and yellowed pages. I sat down with a cup of tea and began to write. Not a letter to my children nor a diary, but a letter to myself. Dear Charlotte. I began, and the words flowed like a river that had been dammed for years. I wrote about the pain, about the silence, about the forgotten moments. I poured out my heart like never before. I spoke of the neglected girl, the lonely wife, the invisible mother. But amidst the pain, something began to stir within me. A kind of gentle indignation, a whispered question. What if I deserve more? What if there's life beyond being everyone else's supporting character? The notebook, little by little, began to gain color with my voice. I finished the letter with tears in my eyes, but also with a lighter heart. What I had always kept to myself was now written down. It was mine. For the first time I heard myself. And at that moment an almost imperceptible spark ignited. The desire for change. What if I could be more than the mother they ignore? On Saturday morning Ruth called me to go to the market with her. I hesitated for a moment, but something inside me yearned for air, for colors, for life. I put a floral scarf in my hair and we walked on. The sun seemed lighter that day, and the hustle and bustle of the stalls awakened forgotten sensations in me. I smelled fresh fruit, heard laughter, and for an instant, I felt part of something larger. While Ruth negotiated avocados, I observed the faces around us. Ordinary people, each carrying their own story. That's when I heard my name. I turned and saw a man with kind eyes and graying hair. Charlotte Green, he said. It took me a second to recognize him, but then I smiled. Nicholas Scott. He went to high school with me. He had the same curious gaze and welcoming voice as before. We talked for a few minutes. He was now in charge of a community center nearby, and spoke enthusiastically about the social projects he coordinated. I felt strangely comfortable in his presence, as if I had gone back to being that girl who dreamed of being a writer. Before leaving, he held my hand and smiled tenderly. You haven't changed at all, he smiled. We returned home with full bags and light steps. We sat on the porch and Ruth seemed hesitant, as if weighing her words. Then she looked at me with unusual seriousness. Charlotte, I need to tell you something I've kept for years. Her tone chilled me. She then slowly recounted that for a long time, it was known among the neighbors that my husband was having an affair with a woman from the street behind. My heart stopped. I tried to laugh, to deny it, to say it was old gossip, but Ruth wasn't joking. She knew details, she knew names. She said many tried to spare me, but they were also afraid to interfere. You were so devoted. No one had the courage. I heard that as if I were outside my own body. My world, already shaken, began to crack from within. I swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. His memories came like daggers. His delays, the silent dinners, the busy weekends. I always thought he was just reserved, tired. But now everything took on another color. A darker, rawer one. I wasn't just forgotten by the living. I was deceived even by the dead. So I was deceived. Even by him? I stayed silent for a long time after Ruth left. The house felt smaller, tighter, as if the air had grown dense. I went up to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The photographs on the wall stared at me, and each frozen smile seemed to mock my ignorance. My chest hurt in a new way, an old pain but only now understood. It wasn't just the grief I had carried all these years. It was the weight of having idealized a man who didn't exist. A love that, perhaps, never fully belonged to me. And I gave myself entirely, as always. I was the exemplary widow, the honored wife, the woman who kept his memory alive like an altar. But now everything seemed like a lie. His betrayal didn't hurt me just by the act itself. It hurt by the way I nullified my suspicions, how I closed my eyes so as not to collapse. But now, with open eyes, I saw that perhaps it was time to review my entire story. Not to erase it, but to rewrite it with truth. Without veils. Without illusions. I spent my life serving the memory of a man who betrayed me. It was a cloudy morning when I heard soft knocks at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. but something in the rhythm of those knocks made me stop what I was doing. I opened it slowly and to my surprise there he was. Ryan, my youngest. He wore a low baseball cap and dark glasses, as if trying to hide from the world. When he saw me, he took off his glasses and his eyes, so much like his father's, were teary. "Can I come in?" he whispered. I just nodded, unable to speak. He walked in slowly, like someone carrying guilt on their shoulders. I sat on the sofa, he next to me. We were silent for a while, until he blurted out in a thin voice. "I couldn't sleep anymore. I needed to see you." My heart unexpectedly tightened. He was there, of his own free will, and something inside me so wounded stirred. I went to the kitchen, made coffee as I always did. He followed me with his gaze as if seeing something lost. When I returned, he held my hand tightly. It was a timid touch but loaded with meaning. He looked at me like someone who needed forgiveness, but also comfort. Like a son who still remembered where he came from. "I couldn't sleep anymore. I needed to see you." After the first coffee and some comfortable silences, Ryan began to speak. His voice trembled and his eyes avoided mine. She doesn't like me coming here. Says you manipulate me, that I become childish when I listen to you." First I didn't understand, but then I realized he was talking about his girlfriend. Or perhaps more than that, about an emotional prison disguised as love. He took a deep breath as if gathering courage to dive in. "She wants to distance me. Always has. From my brothers too. From our history." The words came out broken by tears he could no longer hold back. I stayed quiet for so long. I thought I was protecting the peace. But I was only nullifying myself. I wanted to hug him but I waited. He needed to finish. "Forgive me, Mom. I left you alone. I saw everything and pretended not to see." His voice broke. I lost myself. That's when I hugged him. Strong, tight, like I used to when he was afraid of thunder. And at that instant, more than pain, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. My son still existed beneath those layers of silence. "Forgive me, Mom. I lost myself." We spent the afternoon together like old times. I made my corn cake, the one he always praised when he was little. "It's still the best in the world," he said with a mouthful, and we laughed. We talked about movies, about childhood, about simple things. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my house was alive. There was laughter, shared stories, there was human warmth. Between slices, he showed me photos from his teenage years, laughed at the clothes he wore, told me about a shelved project he'd like to resume. "But she says it's a waste of time," he commented more softly. The pain was still there, but there was also a new sparkle in his eyes. As if being with me reminded him of who he was before the constraints. We stayed until early evening, sitting on the porch watching the sky close. When he said goodbye, he squeezed my hand tightly and promised to return. I don't know what the future holds, but that day something restarted. A thread was reconnected. And even if fragile, it was true. And that was enough. For the first time in years, my heart felt warm. After Ryan's visit, something inside me changed. It was as if a new ground had been plowed in my chest, ready to receive seeds I hadn't even imagined planting before. That's when I remembered Nicholas and the community center he had mentioned. I picked up the phone and called. His voice on the other end of the line was warm as always. "Come visit, Charlotte. It might be good for you. And for us too." The next day I put on my best smile. The one I used when I needed to be strong. Nicholas greeted me at the center's door with a light hug and eyes that didn't judge. He showed me the rooms, the murals, the small projects blossoming there. Children, elderly, women. All with stories woven by pain, but also by the will to start anew. I felt small before the greatness of that place. When he asked if I wanted to help with the writing and listening workshops, I hesitated. "But I've never done anything like that," I confessed. He smiled tenderly and said, "You've lived. And that's more than enough." For the first time, someone saw value in my story, not just in my services. I said yes. "It's never too late to reinvent yourself," he said. In the first week, I observed more than I spoke. I sat in silence, listening to stories, shy laughs, suppressed outbursts. Little by little, the women started to include me in their small conversation circles. There was a naturalness there that I hadn't felt in years. They spoke of absent husbands, children who had left, dreams put aside. It was as if each pain revealed a part of my own. One of them, with gray hair like mine, told me something I never forgot. "Here you are seen." And she wasn't just talking about eyes. She was talking about the soul. About the silent recognition that unites those who have suffered too much and survived. We were not fragile. We were whole even with scars. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to conform. I started participating more, suggesting simple ideas, organizing notebooks, distributing tea. Nothing grand but full of intention. The center's routine gave me back something I thought was lost: purpose. And more than that, the certainty that my life could still mean something beyond my home's walls. I was no longer just the forgotten mother. I was becoming someone new. "Here you are seen," one of them said. In the third week, I was invited to the Wednesday discussion circle. It was a safe space where women sat in a circle and shared their stories. I sat with a racing heart, sweaty hands. I remained silent during the first few rounds, but something in their gaze encouraged me. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about Mother's Day, about the empty plates, about the cold notes. I told them about my husband, about the betrayal hidden for years. I spoke of my son's silence, of the letter I wrote to myself, of the pain of feeling invisible. The words came out trembling but true. And as I spoke, I felt something inside me being freed. I wasn't weak for feeling. I was strong for not giving up. When I finished, the silence was absolute. A few seconds later, murmurs of support began, teary eyes, nods of heads. One of them held my hand. I felt it. I was no longer alone. There, in that circle, my voice finally existed. And with it, a new Charlotte was born. When I finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Not even mine. I learned from Ryan that 2 days after our afternoon together, Victoria discovered the visit. He didn't say how, but a slip was enough. A smell of cake, perhaps, or a smile that couldn't be explained. The confrontation was inevitable. He called me the next day, his voice tense, trying to sound calm. "She freaked out," he said. "She said you're poisoning me, that I became a child again for looking for you." My chest tightened. I didn't want to be the cause of a fight. But neither could I accept this role of villain that I never was. I asked if he was okay, and there was a long pause on the other end. "I'm confused. But relieved." He said he didn't deny the visit. He said for the first time in a long time, that he was tired of having to ask permission to love the one who raised him. "She doesn't understand that I need this. I need to see you, hear your voice, remember who I am." His words came as a bomb and also as a risk. I knew Victoria wouldn't let it go. But something in Ryan had changed. He was no longer running away. He was taking a stand. And that in itself was already a victory. "She treats me like a man, not like a decorative doll." He returned the following Saturday. He brought homemade bread, ground coffee, and sometimes simple flowers he picked himself. Ruth was with me on the porch, tending to the lavender pots. I introduced the two with a proud smile. Ryan was polite, respectful, and sat next to us with a naturalness that moved me. We talked about the weather, about movies, until Ruth, with her sharp sincerity, asked about Victoria. He sighed like someone carrying too heavy a backpack. "She wants to protect me. But sometimes she traps me." Ruth nodded without judgment. "It happens more than you imagine, my son. Love, when too controlled, becomes a leash." He laughed nervously. "And do you think it's possible to escape?" Ruth looked at him with a gentle firmness. "Of course it is. But you have to want it more than wanting to please." The conversation remained light, but full of small truths. For the first time, I saw Ryan listening with an open heart. I saw in him the boy who created worlds with paper and glue, and also the man who, little by little, was trying to find his own voice. At that moment, we were 3 survivors, exchanging seeds of courage. "We need to learn to protect ourselves, even from our own family," Ruth said. Victoria's reaction was not long in coming. When Ryan returned home that night, she was waiting for him in the living room, arms crossed and eyes flashing. "Either her or me," were her words as he told me later. The ultimatum that so many mothers dread hearing. But that Sunday he did not yield. He slept on the sofa. The next day, he packed his bags and went to a friend's house. And then he came to me unannounced. I opened the door and saw him with 2 small suitcases. I didn't come to stay, Mom. I just needed a place where I didn't feel guilty for existing. It took me a while to respond. I reached out and hugged him. I knew his decision would cost him dearly, but I also knew it was a necessary step. For the first time, he was choosing himself. And in doing so, he was choosing me too. A few days later, Victoria went to his friend's house and tried to convince him to come back. She said it was a phase, that he was confused, that he was being influenced. But he looked into her eyes and spoke with a firmness I had never seen before. "I'm not a child anymore, Victoria. And I won't let you decide for me. I choose my mother," he said, and slammed the door. Jacob appeared on a cloudy afternoon, with firm steps and a tense expression. He didn't announce his visit. He just rang the doorbell as if performing a task. I opened the door with a racing heart, but kept my tone neutral. "Can I come in?" he asked, as if he were a stranger. I settled him in the living room and prepared tea, but he refused. He sat upright, as if he didn't want to linger. "We need to talk, Mom. Adjust some expectations." I remained silent, waiting. He began by saying that he had heard comments, from Tyler, from Victoria, even from acquaintances, that I was overreacting, exposing the family with my community involvements. He said that my name was starting to circulate in conversations as that of a resentful woman, playing the victim. I swallowed the pain dry. I didn't react. I just looked at him, trying to find my son behind the coldness. "I know you're hurt, but we need to proceed with maturity," he continued. Maturity. The word sounded like an accusation, as if, until now, I had only been a whining child. He seemed more concerned with appearances than with the truth. And yet, I listened to everything. Because for the first time, I knew that my answer wouldn't come with shouts. "No drama, Mom. What we're hearing is enough." That's when he blurted out, almost as a justification. "You nullified yourself so much, Mom, that we didn't know how to relate to you anymore." I stood still. It was as if he had subtly blamed me, like offering a gift. He didn't say it in anger, but with surgical coldness. Always saying yes, always available. Never talking about yourself. It became difficult to see you beyond the role of mother. The phrase cut through me. Was it true? Had I erased myself so much that I ceased to be anyone beyond the function? But what about them? They never asked who I was. They never wanted to know what I liked, what hurt me, what made me laugh. I gave myself entirely, it's true. But does that justify the forgetting? The indifference? I was torn between the urge to blame myself and the instinct to defend myself. That's when I realized. The truth wasn't one-sided. I had been too silent, yes. But they had also grown accustomed to that silence. They created a paper mother without depth, without questions. And now that I spoke, they were uncomfortable with the sound of my voice. Was it my fault? Or theirs for never asking who I was? It took me a while to respond. Jacob looked at me as if expecting a retraction. But that's not what he found. I kept my voice serene, firm. "You're partly right. I nullified myself. Out of love, out of fear, out of habit. But not anymore." He frowned. "I didn't come here to argue, Mom." I took a deep breath. Neither did I. But I came to exist. And at that moment I was no longer the woman who asked for space, I occupied it. He tried to argue, but I noticed something in him wavering. An uncertainty, perhaps. As if, for the first time, he saw that I wouldn't go back to the old role. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg. But every word of mine was like a wall going up. Not to push him away, but to protect myself. He noticed. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and said he needed to think. I stayed there, sitting in the same place, feeling the strange strength of someone who chose not to yield. For the first time, I wasn't just the mother. I was the woman. And that was enough. Would he come back? I didn't know. But a certainty had settled deep within me. My identity would no longer depend on their love. I was my own. Finally. Maybe they don't know me. But I'm starting to know myself. Took me days to decide. I wrote and rewrote the invitation several times until it was simple. Dinner at my place. Just us. Sunday, 7 p.m. I didn't ask, didn't beg. I just invited. Jacob's response was brief. "I'll try to go." Tyler sent a confirmation emoji with few words. Ryan just replied, I'll be there. I knew they would come more out of obligation or curiosity than out of desire. But still they would come. I spent Saturday preparing the house, but without the blind enthusiasm of other times. I set the table carefully but not with expectation. I made simple dishes, no exaggerations. The food was good but the focus was elsewhere. When I heard the doorbell my heart raced. One by one they arrived. No warm hugs, just restrained greetings. They sat with cautious glances, as if expecting a confrontation. But there would be no confrontation. There would be truth. I observed each face, each gesture. They were grown men with their own pains and fears. My sons and at the same time strangers. I sat at the head of the table with serenity. On the outside calm. Inside an earthquake. But I knew this moment had to happen. Not for them. For me. The table was set. But I wasn't the same anymore. The dinner began in silence. They chewed in rhythm, avoiding prolonged eye contact. Then, without raising my voice, I began to speak. I didn't read a speech. I spoke from the heart. I said I had spent my life serving, silencing, waiting. I said I understood the mistakes, including my own, but that I would no longer accept living invisibly. I am not here to blame. I am here to affirm myself, I said. Eyes averted, forks paused in midair. I continued. I know I annulled myself, and I know you got used to it, but now I'm learning who I am. And I won't hide anymore. I saw Jacob swallow hard. Tyler lowered his gaze. Ryan firm nodded discreetly. My words were not attacks, they were liberations. For me. For the woman I forgot to be. I ended with the phrase that had echoed within me for weeks. I will no longer beg for love. I deserve respect. The table fell silent. But this time it was a different silence. Not one of abandonment, but one of listening. For the first time I was not interrupted, nor ignored. I was heard. And that was all I needed. I will no longer beg for love. I deserve respect. After my speech, no one reacted immediately. They remained there, seated, as if digesting more than just the food. Jacob wiped his lips with his napkin, looked around and simply said, I understand. Tyler still couldn't look me in the eye, but his shoulders weren't as tense anymore. Ryan smiled proudly and took another helping from the dish. The atmosphere was thick but not hostile. It was the beginning of something, or perhaps the end of what was never said. I didn't expect hugs or apologies that night, but I noticed small gestures. Jacob collected the plates. Tyler asked about the plants on the porch. Ryan, as he left, hugged me tightly. There were no promises, no guarantees, but there was something new in their eyes, presence, perhaps surprise, perhaps disconcertion, but above all respect. I said goodbye to the three at the door. One by one they left in silence. The street was calm, the air cold. I closed the door firmly, but something made me turn back and peek through the window. The last image I saw was Jacob hesitating for a second before getting into the car. And then I realized they heard me. And that was already a rebirth. They left in silence, but left the door ajar. Today my mornings are different. I wake up without the rush of before, without the obligation to prove my worth. I put on my apron and walk to the community center with firm steps. There I find women who, like me, were forgotten within their own homes. I tell my story in parts, but I listen more than I speak. Each story is a mirror. Fragmented but familiar. I coordinate small listening circles, help with teas, give writing workshops for mothers who need to relearn how to talk about themselves. When one of them looks me in the eye and says, I thought it was just me, I smile and hold her hand. There's no ready-made solution, but there is a path. And that already transforms. There I am no longer a shadow. I am a presence. Nicholas stops by occasionally, always with encouraging words. He says the center came alive with my arrival, but I know it's he who lit the first light. At the end of each day I return home light. Tired, yes, but light. Not because everything was resolved, but because now I know my story continues. And that others can blossom with me. Every story I hear is a part of mine that heals. Ryan comes on Sundays. He brings homemade bread, ground coffee, and sometimes simple flowers that he picks himself. We talk about movies, politics, pains, and plans. He is calmer. He said he started therapy, that he wants to understand why he gave in so much. I just listened, proud. Tyler also appeared gradually, first with short messages, then with questions. Once he sent me a childhood photo. "Remember this?" he wrote. "With Jacob everything is slower." But weeks after dinner I received a package with a book about resilient women. Inside, a dedication. "To my mother. I am still learning." That made me cry. Not for the gift but for the opening. For the attempt. They were still far from the idealized mother. And I was no longer the one who expected everything. But there were bridges. I don't know if we will ever be a TV commercial family. Perhaps we never will. But now there is movement, there is exchange, there are possibilities. And for me, that is already more than I imagined. Rebuilding is not erasing what was. It is accepting the rubble and deciding what to plant on it. And I chose to plant affection. Without expectations. But with roots. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Today, I water my plants on the porch with the same dedication I watered my children. But now I also water myself. Ruth is by my side as always with her cup of tea and sharp advice. Between us, there are no uncomfortable silences. Only pauses of peace. We observe the flowers growing, the wind swaying the branches, time passing unhurriedly. We live a kind of late but true fullness. We talk about simple things. Recipes, birds, small plans. She laughs at my attempts to care for orchids. I joke that she's my unofficial therapist. And between one joke and another, I realize that life has settled in a different way. Not the way I dreamed when I was young, but in a way that makes me sleep in peace. Sometimes I miss the old Charlotte, the one who believed that being loved was enough. But I learned that being seen, respected, and honored starts within ourselves. And that we can blossom even when we think it's too late. Because life, when cared for with truth, always finds a way to be reborn. It took 6 decades, but I finally blossomed. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you been through something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.